Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The National Institutes of Health's procurement arm issued requests for proposals on a multiple award contract 3.5 years ago. The program, known as CIOSP4, still hasn't made any awards, and it's still bogged down in protests. The program it replaces has been extended several times. My next guest says it might be time for NIH to start over. Federal sales and marketing consultant Larry Allen joins me now, and this is really one of the sad sagas of these types of contracts, isn't it? The NITAC effort.
Tom, it really is. We want CISP4 to succeed. There's obviously some demand for a NITAC contract offering by virtue of the fact that CIOSP3 keeps getting extended and then orders keep flowing through it. Unfortunately, at some point, you're going to have to say it's time for us to cut the cord. How long can you justify throwing good money after bad and making efforts on both the government and industry side to get CISP4 awarded? Sometimes you have to just say, we're going to stop this and start fresh again. I think now is a particularly good time for that to happen. We keep having new protests filed at the claims court, and now NITAC is getting a new director. And that's an opportunity to take a new direction.
Yeah, for that matter, NIH is going to have a new director pretty soon, the whole organization. But there is precedent for this. I mean, a couple of years ago, the GSA canceled a project like this, a multiple award contract program that just got bogged down to the point where they abandoned it and started all over.
That's exactly right. This is the Alliant 2 small business contract that never got off the launching pad, for the exact same reasons we're seeing now in CIOSP4, Tom. Just an unending parade of protests. And GSA made the decision that turned out to be the correct one, to scrap Alliant 2 small business and come up with the standalone Polaris small business contract, a contract that GSA has just started making awards on in the last 60 days. So now that Polaris contract is going to be up and running on the short horizon and starting to actually do some business, ironically catapulting it ahead of CIOSP4, which it started after.
Right. And as you point out, CIOSP3 expires April 29th. It's unlikely that CIOSP4 could be awarded by then at this point, since there's still protests going on.
Well, Tom, not only are there protests, but I think you have to look at it, and you mentioned this at the introduction. The original RFP came out 3.5 years ago. So what we're talking about are contract awards. If you look at it like if this were a contract for automobiles, it would be a contract today that would feature the very best automobiles from 2020 and 2021. And that's not really where you want to be. The technology has changed in the IT industry. The solutions have changed. 3.5 years ago, nobody, for example, was really talking about AI in government. Certainly, cloud has evolved since then as well. And we've got some new players in the market with some new innovative technologies. These are all reasons why I think it's a good time to just say, this was a great effort, but sometimes, it's like the end of a losing football season. You got to cut your losses and draft up and get some free agents for the next year and put a better product out. And I think NITAC could kind of take the lead from that example.
Of course, that would set them back another couple of years, right? Because it takes a good solid 2 years to do these when they run smoothly.
That's true. And, I think that you have to make a business decision about whether or not it's worth doing a CISP4. As I indicated earlier, there's certainly interest in CIOSP3, but, just because you had CISP3 doesn't automatically mean number 4 gets to follow it, or that number 4 looks structurally a lot like 3. You could have the path that the Air Force took, for example, when it went to recompete its NetSense contract. Instead of doing standalone contracts, they did a series of blanket purchase agreements based off of GSA schedule contracts. That was a significant reduction in the time needed to get the program in place, as well as reducing the likelihood for lengthy and successful protests.
We're speaking with Larry Allen, president of Allen Federal Business Partners. And of course, if you do stop and then start over again, you have to make sure the new effort is also not going to attract protests. In other words, if you're putting a baby seal out there on the ice and the polar bears come and rip it to pieces, you don't want to start over again with another baby seal.
That's very true. And I think, this is one of the lessons that NITAC should have learned from industry comments before the final RFP ever went out, Tom. And that is that there's a real danger to doing a unified come one, come all contract method. GSA was going to do that for its Oasis Plus contract, and industry said, please don't do that. Please have there be an unrestricted and then small business pods to go along with it. And GSA took that approach. I think NITAC would be well served by putting together a CISP4 small business like there is for CISP3, ironically, and then do an unrestricted CISP4 for everyone else. We've seen almost all of the protests here, Tom, come from small businesses and JVs as both government and industry try to feel their way through changing regulations on how JV offers will be treated. There's a strong argument, I think, to be made if you want to do a CISP4 that you put them on two different tracks. You do a small business track and an unrestricted track. Otherwise, you're going to be right back where you are.
Well, let's hope they're listening to you over there on Executive Boulevard. In the meantime, contractors are warily, I guess, eyeing this Department of Government Efficiency. News keeps coming out about what they're going to go after, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. What are you hearing? What are contractors that you talk to, what are they worried about? Or what are they happy about?
Tom, I can tell you that a lot of contractors were maybe a little bit slow to pick up on this, but they're not slow anymore about it. A lot of companies are starting to ask questions about not only what it means for their federal customers in terms of available budget, but what it means for they themselves being targeted as a group of companies that the perception could be overcharging government. And so I think this is something that the industry, the government contract industry, really ought to justifiably pay attention to. We know that the rhetoric doesn't always match the reality, but sometimes it comes close. And in order for the Department of Government Efficiency to be successful, it probably doesn't need to match the rhetoric coming out. Even more modest headwinds or headways into government spending would be enough for industry to take up and stand up and take notice. So I think that's exactly what they need to do right now. Contractors should have a voice in this. Remember, there are three branches of government. You've got your elected officials in Congress and that probably need to know just what the economic impact of all those government contracts are in their state and district. At the same time, do we want some efficiency in government? Sure we do. Is there room for efficiency? Absolutely. And I think that's one way where contractors could actually benefit. So on the one hand, it might be a little concerning, oh, my budgets are going to get cut. On the other hand, if this actually becomes an efficiency exercise, as opposed to just a spending cut exercise, contractors could have an important role to play in that.
And the thing I haven't heard anyone mention is the idea, and maybe Elon and Vivek aren't aware of this, but there is an old rusty tool down there called the A76 competitions. And those have been sort of dormant now for well more than a decade.
You're absolutely correct, Tom. And A76 basically says that the government should not be competing with industry on non-inherently governmental functions. So if you've got something that is not an actual statutory requirement of government, they need to take a hard look at that and see if their functions might compete with the private sector. And if so, A76 says at minimum you have to do a cost-benefit analysis to make sure that the government solution is actually worth it and not causing undue competition with the private sector. A76 is a good tool. It doesn't always get used, but I think to your point, it's right there in the toolkit and it's been effective before. And traditionally, we've seen this as a tool being used by Republican administrations. Well, we're about to have one of those again, along with the Republican Congress. You don't always need new tools. Sometimes what you need to do is just clean off the ones that you have, and A76 is a good one.
Larry Allen is president of Allen Federal Business Partners. As always, thanks so much.
Tom, thank you very much, and I wish your listeners happy selling.
And we'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.